The reflection in the polished black marble of the conference table was of a woman I didn't know, yet a woman who was securing a seven-figure deal with nothing more than a well-timed smile and a slight lean forward in her chair. This woman was powerful, desirable, and utterly in control. 3 weeks ago, she hadn't existed. 3 weeks ago, I was Mark, the 35-year-old owner of a flailing consulting firm, drowning in debt and desperation. Now, our revenue was skyrocketing, and the most powerful men in the city were eating out of the palm of my delicate, manicured hand. The Nexus Orb had taken my body and my life, but it had given me a weapon I was only just learning how to wield. That Tuesday had begun with the familiar stench of impending failure. The quarterly numbers were a disaster, spread across my desk like a diagnosis for a terminal illness. I was running on fumes and lukewarm coffee, my tie feeling more like a noose with each passing hour. Our only hope was the Vanguard Industries contract, a deal so large it could single-handedly resurrect our dying company. Without it, the 12 employees outside my office door would be updating their resumes by the end of the month. My secretary, Chloe, had been with me for 2 years. At 25, she was the epitome of quiet competence. She was punctual, organized, and utterly unobtrusive, a beige presence in the background of my chaotic professional life. She did her work with a silent efficiency that I appreciated but rarely acknowledged. In truth, I barely noticed her most days, another piece of office furniture that served its purpose without fuss. The first sign of the end of the world as I knew it came around 10 a.m. A strange, cerulean light began to pulse outside my office window, casting shimmering, unnatural patterns on the wall. I assumed it was a faulty neon sign or an electrical issue from the building across the street. But the light intensified, consolidating into a brilliant, humming sphere of pure energy. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my focus as the orb moved with an eerie, intelligent purpose. Then, with a sound like shattering crystal, it burst through my window. Chaos erupted. Screams echoed through the open-plan office as the blue orb zipped through the air like a sentient pinball. People scrambled under desks, their morning routines dissolving into primal fear. The orb was impossibly fast, a blur of light that seemed to tag person after person before they could even process what was happening. It darted towards my office, and I had just enough time to stand before it slammed into my chest. A violent, electric shock seized every muscle in my body. My vision bleached to an agonizing white, and for a timeless moment, there was nothing but the roar of energy in my ears. When my sight returned, the world was blurry, and the first thing I noticed was the floor. It was much closer than it should have been. My entire perspective had shifted. I looked down and saw not my own familiar suit and scuffed leather shoes, but a conservative gray skirt, sensible flats, and a pair of legs I'd never seen before. A wave of vertigo washed over me as I felt my body shrink, my center of gravity plummeting as my hips flared and my shoulders cinched inward. I had breasts. Not just breasts, but enormous, heavy mounds that strained painfully against the fabric of a white blouse. My hair, once short and meticulously parted, now felt like a soft curtain falling around my shoulders. My hands, when I raised them to my face, were small, slender, and utterly alien. Everything was out of focus until I realized I was wearing glasses, a cheap, flimsy pair that had somehow appeared on my face, despite the fact I'd had perfect 20/20 vision my entire life. I touched my cheek, feeling the unfamiliar curve of the bones beneath, the softness of the skin. I opened my mouth to shout, but the voice that emerged was a high, breathy tone that was a stranger to my own ears. What in God's name is happening? The feminine sound of it sent a fresh wave of horror through me. Across the room, the pandemonium was a symphony of disbelief. I saw my own voice, my own deep baritone, cut through the noise. This is impossible. What happened to everyone? I spun around, my new body clumsy and unbalanced, and saw myself. My 6-foot frame, my dark hair, my expensive suit, all of it was there, standing by the marketing department, looking just as terrified as I felt. Someone else was wearing my life. "Hey!" I called out, the strange, high voice cracking with panic. You're in my body." The person wearing my face turned to look at me, and I saw my own blue eyes widen in shock. Mark? How do I know it's you? Because this is my office, my company, and we're about to lose the Vanguard contract. I shot back, the words tumbling out. Who are you? My own lips moved, and Chloe's timid voice answered, filled with a terror that mirrored my own. It's Chloe. Your secretary. The next hour was a blur of controlled hysteria. We herded the dozen traumatized employees into the conference room, the same room where our company's fate was supposed to be decided that afternoon. Through a painstaking process of cross-examination, sharing private memories, and asking questions only the true person would know, the name of my first pet, the location of Chloe's secret stash of emergency chocolate, we established a grim new reality. The 12 people who had walked into the office that morning were gone, replaced by 12 human collages, their identities trapped in vessels that were partially or wholly unfamiliar. Chloe was indeed now inhabiting my 35-year-old male body, a vessel 10 years her senior. She moved awkwardly, her small gestures lost in my larger frame, as if she were a child playing dress-up in her father's suit. I, in turn, was trapped in her 25-year-old form, but the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't simply Chloe's body. It was a grotesque composite. We retreated to my old office, the shattered window a gaping wound in the wall. I needed a mirror. The reflection in the chrome base of my desk lamp was distorted and useless. I finally locked the door and faced the full-length mirror behind it. The woman staring back was a stranger. She had Chloe's delicate facial structure and her soft, brown hair, but the resemblance ended there. Thick, black-framed glasses, the kind I'd never seen Chloe wear, were perched on her nose. And then there were the breasts. They were magnificent, impossibly large and perfectly shaped, straining the buttons of the simple white blouse to their breaking point. Chloe, I said, my new voice soft and unsteady. I adjusted the glasses, which kept sliding down my nose. You never wore glasses. Standing behind me, trapped in my body, she shook her head. My own head. It was a profoundly nauseating sight. I didn't. I have 20/20th vision. Or I did. She gestured awkwardly towards my new chest. And that's not me. I was modest. A horrifying realization began to dawn. The Nexus orb hadn't just swapped us. It had played God with a blender. We pieced it together by observing the others. Jenna from accounting, who had been legally blind without her Coke bottle lenses, was now blinking in astonishment, able to read the fine print on a contract from across the room. She had apparently received someone else's perfect eyesight. But she was also staring down in dismay at a chest that was now completely flat. Across the room, Megan, our normally buxom head of marketing, was weeping quietly, her once famous curves gone, replaced by what must have been Jenna's original petite frame. Derek from tech support had gained 50 pounds of muscle and was speaking with the deep, booming voice of our elderly security guard, who was now a scrawny teenager. The orb had mixed and matched traits with a terrifying randomness, creating a gallery of human patchworks. I had Chloe's age and basic bone structure, but I'd been cursed with Jenna's terrible eyesight and gifted with Megan's spectacular breasts. The cheap underwire of Chloe's sensible bra dug into my ribs, a piece of engineering wholly unequal to its new task. I was a living, breathing Frankenstein's monster, assembled from the parts of my female employees. And then, like a punch to the gut, I remembered. The meeting, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Vanguard Industries. They're coming at 2 o'clock. Chloe's, my face went pale. We have to cancel. We have to call the police or the army. What else can we do? No. I snapped, the old authority flaring in my new, softer voice. If we cancel, we're finished. They'll walk and we'll go bankrupt. Everyone in that conference room loses their job. I looked at her, at my own face staring back, filled with fear and confusion. An insane, desperate plan began to form in my mind. You're going to take that meeting. What? She squeaked. Mark, that's impossible. I'm your secretary. I can't pretend to be the CEO of a company. You don't have to, I insisted, my mind racing. You just have to be a puppet. I'll be the puppeteer. We'll rig an earpiece. I will hear everything and I will feed you every single word. You just have to sit there, in my body, and repeat what I say. I grabbed her, my shoulders, my small hands feeling ridiculous. This contract is everything. It's our only lifeline. We can deal with this nightmare, after we're not broke. Without this deal, we are all finished. No matter what body we're in. Chloe stared at me, her eyes darting between my face and the shocking new contours of the body that used to be hers. The glasses made me look more studious, more serious than she ever had, but the comically oversized chest made the whole picture look like a bizarre caricature. She gave up trying to tell me to button the straining blouse. It was a lost cause. She knew I was right. We couldn't afford to lose this contract. She didn't have much time to second-guess the madness of it all. The clock on my desk was ticking, each second a hammer blow counting down to our potential salvation or our absolute ruin. The Vanguard Industries representatives, two impeccably dressed men in their late 40s named Samuel and Isaac, arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. Their faces were a mask of corporate professionalism, but I saw their eyes flicker the moment they saw me. I was playing the part of the secretary, a role I'd never imagined, leading them from the reception area to the conference room. I was acutely aware of their gazes, not on my face or the files in my hand, but lingering on the impossible curve straining against the thin fabric of my blouse. It was a demeaning, objectifying feeling, but in the midst of my discomfort, a cold, calculating thought surfaced. Their distraction was a vulnerability, and I was desperate enough to exploit any vulnerability I could find. The meeting was an exercise in pure, unadulterated tension. Chloe, now wearing my identity like an ill-fitting suit, sat at the head of the long marble table. She looked the part, thanks to my expensive tailoring, but her posture was rigid, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists beneath the table. I sat in the secretary's traditional spot to her right, a legal pad in front of me, a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece nestled in her ear, and its receiver taped uncomfortably to the inside of my thigh. Mr. Vance, Mr. Harrison, Chloe began, her voice a slightly shaky imitation of my own confident baritone. Our proposal, as you know, offers a 30% cost reduction compared to your current provider. She was reciting my words, but her delivery was wooden, her terror palpable to me, even if the clients only saw a man who seemed unusually nervous. I could see Samuel's attention drifting. His eyes kept flicking over to me as I pretended to take meticulous notes. He wasn't listening to the pitch. He was staring at my chest. The old Mark would have been furious, would have called him out for his unprofessionalism. The new Mark, however, saw an opportunity. As Chloe continued to drone on, reciting the technical specifications I was feeding her, I leaned forward, my movements slow and deliberate, to refill Samuel's water glass. I made sure to give him an unobstructed view down the front of my straining blouse. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and a faint flush crept up his neck. When he looked back at Chloe, he was suddenly nodding, far more engaged. Yes, a 30% reduction, he repeated, as if just processing the information. That is significant. We pushed through for another hour, a grueling back and forth of numbers and projections. Chloe was a trooper, following my instructions to the letter, but she was a terrible actor. Her fear made her seem weak, and I could feel the deal slipping through our fingers. They were polite, but non-committal. They weren't sold. The meeting concluded without a signature, a polite deferral to review the final details internally. It was the corporate kiss of death. As Chloe was showing them out, I lingered in the conference room, pretending to gather my notes. The door was ajar, and I heard Samuel and Isaac's low voices from the hallway. They weren't talking about our company's synergy or our projected ROI. They were talking about me. "Did you see the secretary?" Samuel murmured. "Good God, what a bombshell." I was trying not to stare. Isaac replied with a chuckle. "I don't think I heard a word Mark said for the last 20 minutes. A switch flipped in my brain. It was a cold, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless realization. They didn't see a person. They saw a body. They saw a pair of breasts and a pretty face. The old me would have been disgusted. The new me, the one fighting for the survival of my company and the livelihoods of 12 traumatized employees, saw the most powerful negotiating tool I had ever possessed. I stepped out into the hallway, a warm, professional smile plastered on my new face. "Gentlemen," I said, my higher voice cutting through their conversation. They both straightened up, looking mildly embarrassed at being caught. "I was just thinking, the numbers on paper can be so dry. Why don't we continue this discussion over dinner? I know a wonderful restaurant downtown, on our company's dime, of course. A more relaxed setting might be just what we need to iron out the final details." Samuel and Isaac exchanged a quick, eager glance. It was a look I recognized, a predatory glint I'd seen in boardrooms and bars my entire adult life. But for the first time, it wasn't directed at some anonymous woman across the room. It was directed at me. And I was going to use it. "That sounds perfect," Samuel said, his smile now directed entirely at me, bypassing Chloe completely. Chloe shot me a look of pure panic from behind them. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent command to play along. This contract was everything, and I was suddenly willing to do anything to secure it. As they walked towards the elevator, already discussing which steakhouse had the best wine list, I was hit with another, more practical problem. I looked down at my ridiculous, ill-fitting attire. There was no way I was going to dinner in a secretary's blouse that was one deep breath away from a catastrophic button failure. I was going to need a whole new arsenal. "Shopping? You're going shopping right now." Chloe's voice, my old voice, was a mixture of disbelief and accusation when I caught her in my former office. The signed Vanguard contracts lay on the desk, a testament to a victory she couldn't comprehend. "I can't go to a five-star restaurant looking like a thrift store Barbie doll," I retorted, gesturing down at the rumpled skirt and the blouse that was now actively gaping between the buttons. "This isn't just about dinner, Chloe. This is the second phase of the negotiation. Appearance is leverage. I need something that fits this." I gestured to my new body with a sense of detachment, as if it were a newly acquired piece of corporate hardware. "Something appropriate." With the company credit card and a tower window, I took a taxi to the most expensive boutique in the financial district. The experience was utterly disorienting. For my entire life, shopping for clothes had been a chore, a necessary evil. Now it was a strategic mission. Saleswomen flocked to me, their eyes assessing my unusual proportions with practiced skill. They saw a woman with a figure that was both a blessing and a curse for off-the-rack clothing. I was led into a plush fitting room, surrounded by mirrors that offered no escape. For the first time since the Nexus orb had ripped my life apart, I was truly alone and forced to confront the full scope of my transformation. I stripped off Chloe's conservative work clothes, the cheap fabric clinging unpleasantly to my skin. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights, the reflection was a surreal spectacle. This wasn't Chloe's body. It was an amalgam, a curated collection of feminine attributes that, when combined, created something startling. The curves were dramatic, almost Jessica Rabbit-esque in their proportions. My skin was flawless and smooth, my waist unnervingly narrow, my hips flaring out into a perfect hourglass. Even with the ridiculously thick glasses, which I took off and placed on the velvet stool, the woman in the mirror was undeniably, objectively, stunning. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to bubble up from the pit of my stomach, not revulsion, but a nascent flicker of appreciation. I tried on a dozen dresses. Most were designed for more conventional figures, either too tight in the chest or too loose in the waist. But then I found it. A simple, elegant black cocktail dress. It was made of a thick, structured fabric that hugged every curve without looking cheap or vulgar. The neckline was a modest but flattering scoop that showcased my décolletage without being overtly provocative. It was sophisticated, powerful, and undeniably alluring. Next came the lingerie. I'd never set foot in a lingerie department in my life, but I navigated it with a cold, analytical precision. I was fitted for a bra by a surprisingly matter-of-fact older woman who declared my new size with a nonchalant air that I found strangely reassuring. The right undergarments worked like architectural scaffolding, lifting and shaping, transforming the merely spectacular into something truly breathtaking. With the right foundation, the black dress became a second skin. Heels were a painful but necessary evil, adding 3 inches of height and forcing a subtle, alluring sway into my walk. A quick stop at a makeup counter provided the final touches. I, Mark, who had never thought about makeup beyond a vague awareness that women wore it, found myself instructing the artist with an intuitive sense of what was needed. Just enough to define the eyes, I said, my new voice sounding more confident. And a neutral, glossy lip. When I returned to my apartment to get ready, the transformation was complete. I stared at the mirror, and the person looking back was no longer a confused man in a woman's body. She was a creation. A work of art built for a single purpose. The dress, the heels, the subtle makeup, the way my hair fell in soft waves around my shoulders, it all came together to create an image of potent, self-aware femininity. When I walked, I felt a new rhythm, a different kind of power. The attention I received on the street as I hailed a cab was no longer just startling, it was intoxicating. Men's heads turned. Their conversations faltered. Their eyes followed me with a mixture of desire and admiration. For the first time, I wasn't just inhabiting this body, I was starting to own it. This body, this face, this entire package was a key, and I was about to find out exactly what doors it could unlock. The restaurant was a cathedral of wealth and power, all dark wood, hushed tones, and the discreet clinking of expensive silverware. When I walked in, the maitre d' rushed to my side, his professional veneer momentarily cracking as he took in my appearance. Samuel and Isaac were already at a corner booth, nursing glasses of scotch. The moment they saw me, they both stood, their expressions a comical blend of shock and undisguised admiration. The nervous, frumpily dressed secretary from their afternoon meeting was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded the attention of the entire room. "Chloe," Samuel said, his voice a little hoarse. "You look stunning." "Thank you, Samuel," I replied, my voice a low, smooth purr that I was surprised to find came naturally. I thought I'd slip into something a little more comfortable for our celebration. I slid into the plush leather of the booth, the movement fluid and practiced, as if I'd been doing it my whole life. Dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. The old Mark would have tried to win them over with data, with logic, with the sheer force of a well-reasoned argument. The new Mark, this new creation, wielded a different set of tools. I listened more than I talked, fixing them with an intense, unwavering gaze that made them feel like the most important men in the world. I laughed at their jokes, a light, musical sound, and subtly touched Samuel's arm when he made a particularly witty remark. The jolt of his reaction, the way his skin flushed under my delicate fingers, was a revelation. It was like discovering a new law of physics. We talked business, but not in the sterile language of the boardroom. I reframed our proposal in terms of vision, of partnership, of mutual success. I leaned in close when discussing the fine print, giving them the faint scent of my expensive perfume and an intoxicating view of the décolletage so perfectly framed by the black dress. By the time the entrees arrived, they weren't just clients, they were conquests, putty in my hands, their professional skepticism melting away under the sustained, calculated heat of my attention. They were competing for my approval, trying to one-up each other with stories of their corporate triumphs. As the waiter cleared our dessert plates, the Vanguard contract lay on the table between us, still unsigned. They had agreed in principle to everything, but the ink wasn't dry. "You know," I said, picking up my wine glass and swirling the deep red liquid. "My apartment is just a few blocks from here. It's much quieter than this place. We could go over the final paperwork there, finalize everything without any distractions." I let the suggestion hang in the air, laden with unspoken promises. What happened next felt both inevitable and profoundly shocking. The attraction I was feigning began to curdle into something real. In this body, with its flood of unfamiliar hormones and its heightened sensory input, their raw, masculine interest was no longer just a tool to be exploited, it was a potent cocktail that my new chemistry was responding to. I had never, in 35 years as a man, been attracted to other men. But as Samuel hailed a taxi, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, a strange, electric thrill shot through me. In the back of the cab, he turned to me, his eyes dark with a mixture of scotch and desire. When he kissed me, the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't the clumsy, familiar act I'd known. It was a supernova of sensation. Every nerve ending in my body, from my lips to my fingertips, fired at once. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and in that moment, I realized the line between the role I was playing and the person I was becoming had irrevocably blurred. By the time we reached my apartment, the $1 million contract was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted him more than I had ever wanted a deal, more than I had ever wanted anyone. The experience of intimacy as a woman was a paradigm shift. It wasn't just a physical act, it was a complete sensory immersion. Every touch was magnified, every sensation amplified to an almost unbearable degree. There was a vulnerability, a surrender, that was entirely new, yet it was coupled with an intoxicating sense of power. Lying there afterwards, tangled in the sheets of my bed, Samuel was completely and utterly mine. He was captivated, enchanted, ready to do anything I asked. When I casually slid the Vanguard contract and a pen onto the nightstand, he signed it without even rereading the first clause. I had discovered something far more potent than business acumen. This body, this femininity, wasn't just a key to unlock doors. It was a battering ram that could smash them down. The next morning, the smell of unfamiliar perfume on my pillows and the heavy weight of the signed Vanguard contract on my nightstand served as stark evidence of my new reality. The reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman with smudged mascara and tousled hair, a faint blush on her cheeks that had nothing to do with makeup. The sight should have been horrifying, but instead, a slow, triumphant smile spread across my new lips. I had done it. I had saved the company. My triumph, however, was not universally celebrated. When I walked into the office, holding the contract like a holy relic, Chloe was waiting for me. He had been pacing my old office, my own anxious mannerisms now displayed on my former body, a sight that was still deeply unsettling. "You didn't come back last night," she said, my deep voice laced with an accusation she had never dared to use when she was my secretary. "I called you a dozen times." "I was closing the deal," I said coolly, placing the contract on the desk. "The Vanguard deal. 7 figures. Our company is saved." Chloe's eyes, my eyes, scanned the signature page and, for a moment, relief washed over my old features. But it was quickly replaced by suspicion. How? They were ready to walk. "What did you do, Mark?" I leaned back against the desk, crossing my legs, the motion feeling more natural with each passing day. "I did what was necessary. I leveraged our assets." "Our assets," she repeated, her voice rising. "You mean your assets. You mean my body." The realization dawned on her face, followed by a wave of revulsion. "Oh God. You slept with him, didn't you? You used my body to sleep with a client." "I used my body," I corrected her, my voice sharp and precise. "This is my body now, Chloe. And I used it to secure a contract that will pay our salary for the next 5 years. You were ready to give up. I found a way to win." Over the following weeks, the permanence of our situation sank in like a slow-acting poison. We learned through frantic, anonymous online searches that the Nexus Orb's effects were irreversible. There were scattered reports from around the globe of similar phenomena, of lives thrown into chaotic disarray with no hope of return. This was not a temporary condition. This was our life now. Chloe struggled profoundly. She was trapped in the body of a 35-year-old man, a decade ripped from her life, her gender identity erased. I, on the other hand, began to adapt with a speed that frightened even myself. More than adapt, I began to thrive. I saw the world not as it had been, but as it was now, a landscape of new and intoxicating opportunities. The traditional power structures I had spent my life trying to navigate as a man were suddenly irrelevant. I could no longer run the company publicly. The logistical and legal nightmare of explaining why the CEO was now a 25-year-old woman who looked suspiciously like his former secretary was insurmountable. So, I made Chloe a deal she couldn't possibly refuse. "You will become the CEO," I announced one afternoon. "You'll take my name, my office, my public-facing responsibilities. You'll be Mark Thorne." "I can't do that," she protested, aghast. You can, and you will, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Your salary will be triple what I was paying you. You'll have the title, the prestige, the corner office. All you have to do is show up and follow my instructions. And what will you be doing? She asked, her voice heavy with suspicion. I'll be running the company, I said with a smile. From behind the scenes. And I will be handling all our major client acquisitions and negotiations. Personally. It was a bizarre, symbiotic arrangement, a corporate puppet show where the world saw a man in charge, but the strings were being pulled by the beautiful, enigmatic woman who was always by his side. It worked with terrifying efficiency. I discovered my new body was the ultimate Trojan horse. Men in boardrooms, men who would have seen the old Mark as a rival, saw me as an object, a pleasant distraction. They underestimated me, patronized me, and in doing so, they handed me everything I wanted. I began to cultivate my new persona with the dedication of an artist. My wardrobe became a carefully curated arsenal of power suits with skirts that were just a little too short, blouses that were just a little too tight, and heels that were just a little too high. Within a month, I had renegotiated our 3 largest vendor contracts, each time using a subtle blend of flirtation and business savvy to secure terms the old Mark could only have dreamed of. The key was a delicate dance, making them feel powerful and in control, letting them believe they were seducing me into a better deal, when in reality, I was manipulating their egos and their libidos to my own advantage. Chloe could only watch, a prisoner in her new gilded cage, her expression a constant, warring mixture of disgust and grudging admiration. Our revenue was up 40% in the first month alone. I wasn't just surviving the change, I was capitalizing on it. The transformation was not merely external. The constant flood of estrogen, the different way the world interacted with me, the new dynamics of power I was mastering, it all began to fundamentally reshape my psyche. I had spent 35 years as a man, operating on logic, aggression, and direct confrontation. Now, my entire methodology was shifting towards intuition, subtlety, and influence. I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the feeling of a room full of powerful men hanging on my every word, not because of a well-structured argument, but because of a well-timed smile. I was enjoying the intoxicating cocktail of desire and underestimation in their eyes. It was the most potent weapon I had ever wielded. My personal life became an extension of my business strategy. Dating was no longer about companionship, it was about acquisition. I dated a senior loan officer from our bank and secured a line of credit at an unheard-of interest rate. A brief but intense affair with a city councilman resulted in our zoning permits for a new office expansion being miraculously expedited. Each man was a stepping stone, a resource to be cultivated and, when necessary, discarded. I learned how to be whatever they wanted me to be, the damsel in distress for the man with a hero complex, the witty intellectual equal for the insecure academic, the passionate, untamable vixen for the board executive. Each persona was a costume, and I was becoming a master of disguise. Chloe, now living as Mark Thorne, watched this metamorphosis with a kind of horrified fascination. The company, our company, was more successful than we had ever imagined possible. In the 3 weeks since the Nexus orb had shattered our lives, we had signed 6 major new clients, all of them secured through what the staff now jokingly referred to as my personal touch. I had moved out of my sterile bachelor pad and into a luxurious penthouse apartment overlooking the city, its closet overflowing with designer clothes and shoes. My old sedan was replaced by a sleek, black sports car. Everything was paid for by the fruits of my newfound influence. Chloe, for her part, had adapted in her own way. Trapped in a male body, she had begun to embrace its physical potential. She started working out, and my formerly neglected physique began to show the definition of daily gym sessions. I noticed she was dating Jenna from accounting, the woman who now had perfect vision but a flat chest. Apparently, the confidence that came with inhabiting a male body had awakened something new in her as well. We were 2 strangers living in borrowed skin, finding new lives we never would have chosen. One evening, as we were working late in the office, she in my old chair, me perched on the edge of the desk, reviewing the final details of yet another lucrative contract I had secured that afternoon, she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice, my voice, quiet and raw. "Being yourself?" I looked down at my hands, at the perfectly manicured nails, the delicate wrists. I smoothed the fabric of my fitted silk dress over my thigh, feeling the elegant curve of my hip. I thought of the man I had been, stressed, perpetually on the edge of failure, invisible in a world of bigger, more successful men. Then I thought of the woman I was now, powerful, desired, wealthy, building an empire on the foolish assumptions of the very men who had once intimidated me. I smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "This is myself now," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And honestly, Chloe, I think I like this version better." The Nexus orb had stolen my identity, my gender, my entire past. But it had handed me a future far grander than any I could have conceived. It had given me power, success, and a body that could bend the world to my will. The old Mark Thorne would have settled for running a small consulting firm. This new creature, this fusion of male ambition and female allure, had no intention of settling for anything less than an empire. And I was just getting started.